I'm doing this interview from Lewes, from Sackville House, which is actually where Katie Bourne, Sussex Police and Crime Commission, is based. And it's my delight to introduce you to Katie for this interview. And Katie has held this post since its inception in 2012, I believe.
That's right, yes.
Now, I know that you live in Sussex. Can you just tell the listeners what your links are and connections are with Sussex?
Oh gosh, I've lived in Sussex most of my life. So I currently live in Anstey, which is just between Haywards Heath and Burgess Hill. I think it's equidistant there. But I've lived in Copthorne, Felbridge, East Grinstead, Nutley, in East Sussex, you name it. I've been all over the place. So I'm a proper Sussex girl, sort of born and bred.
And you've got family here as well, then?
I have. My mother lives very close by in Haywards Heath. She's on her own now because my father died when I was a teenager many years ago. My brother lives with his family in East Grinstead. He hasn't gone far. And my two sons, until 2 days ago, both lived in Sussex, but they've now both moved out, one to London and one to Surrey.
Oh.
So I've lost them both. I'm now an empty nester.
Oh dear. Now, on to policing. Where did your interest in policing and becoming Police and Crime Commissioner come from?
I suppose back in 2009, 2010, I was on the Conservative Party list as on their candidates list to become a Member of Parliament. So I tried to get selected in a couple of seats, but I joined quite late, and by then most of the seats had already been selected. But I stayed on the parliamentary list, and this role I was aware of because obviously it's a Conservative Party initiative. And actually I felt it suited me probably far better than being a Member of Parliament, because I've spent the last 30 years in business, running my own businesses. And I understand about contracts, and I understand about budgets and so on. And this role, when it came about, I thought actually this probably suits my strengths more than anything ever before. And that's exactly how it's turning out to be, actually. It's been a real bonus having the background that I've got. No police experience whatsoever, which has been really beneficial. It stops me getting stuck in all the operational stuff, which actually is not in my remit to do. So my job is to make sure I ask all the questions the public want asked of the police, and make sure I hold them to account for how they deliver policing. So yes, a really, really interesting role. And often people say, oh, why did you, what was the one reason that made you want to do this role? And I suppose it was purely selfish. I live in Sussex, my mum still lives here, my brother and his family live here, and I kind of want us all to stay safe. When I have grandchildren, and one day I hope I do, I hope they come to live in Sussex because it's the safest county in the country.
Is that so?
Well, I hope so. Yeah. That's how I'd like it to be. And so if I can play a small part in that, then that would be good, so that everybody's really safe in our county.
Highly admirable, that is. You say you've got no experience of policing. What about experience of crime? It sort of touches all of us, it seems to be.
Unfortunately, it does. I mean, I've had, I remember several years ago, it was about 15, 16 years ago, I had a very precious string of pearls and a ring that my mother had given me. And my father had given her them both on her 21st birthday, and she gave them to me on mine. And of course, having lost my father, they were very precious, and I had them stolen from me. And I think it was probably the first time I'd really come into contact with crime like that. But it has a huge effect on you. It's not so much the value, although the ring was quite valuable, but it's more the fact that somebody steals your history from you. They take away a bit of your bit of your life. You cannot replace it. And that, I think, gave me a greater understanding of what it's like to be a victim of crime, albeit a small crime. I mean, I've met people in the last 2.5 years who've been victims of some of the most horrific crimes, and your heart really goes out to them. But I hope in some small way, I think as a victim yourself, it gives you a little bit of empathy and understanding.
Could you, Katie, tell listeners the main aspects of your role? Some of them possibly unaware of what the main parts are.
Well, I represent the biggest reform to policing that this country's ever seen, and there's two main reasons why my role is a huge change for policing. Before I came along, policing priorities would be set by government, and then they would be delivered locally by the Chief Constable, and he or she, and in Sussex we have a male Chief Constable, he was held to account by a group of people called the Police Authority. And the Police Authority was made up of 17 members. Majority of them were councillors taken from the three top-tier authorities, so East Sussex County Council, West Sussex County Council and Brighton and Hove Unitary. And then there were other members there who were independent, some with magistrates' experience and so on. And their job was to make sure that the police priorities set by government were delivered properly by the Chief Constable. They were also there to hold him to account for how he delivered those priorities. And on the whole, in Sussex, the police authority here did a pretty good job. But one area they failed, and this is true of all police authorities, was they didn't connect with the public. So nobody knew who they were. And there was a poll done before I came into office that asked people how many of you knew about a police authority, and only 8% of people questioned knew that there was a police authority there to represent them. Well, a year later, the same poll was done again, and of those questions, 62% knew that there was a police and crime commissioner to represent, which is massive in a year. Now, they might not have known my name or colleagues' names, but that I don't think, I'm not that precious that I need people to know my name. What I do want them to know is that there is somebody they can go to if they have any problems. So the decision was made to get rid of police authorities and replace them with police and crime commissioners. And my job now is a big reform for two reasons. One, because instead of the government setting priorities for policing as they used to do, now those priorities are set locally by me, but they're set by local people. So what people in Sussex want to see in policing, what's important to them, I have to put into a police and crime plan which reflects their priorities. So for the first time ever, local people get a say in policing, which they never had before. And then the second big reform is that under the police authority, if you or I didn't like the decisions they were making on our behalf, we had no way of influencing them. Because they were local county councillors, they were never directly elected to be on the police authority. So you had no way of being able to change the decisions they were making or get rid of them or what have you. But of course now you do. So the second big change is the fact that if people don't like the decisions I make or the direction in which I take policing, at the next election they can vote for someone else. Now, I'm not suggesting they do that, of course, but they have that opportunity, whereas they never had it before under the police authority. So you can see it's a massive reform, a massive change, and that's why it's, I suppose for me it was such a frustration that back in 2012 we had such a low turnout for the election.
Certainly what I've noticed is that your presence and the presence of your role has become much more visible in local press, in leaflets, websites, etc., which personally I'm pleased to see. And I'm able then to look at and think what your priorities are, how I can contact you as well. It's all quite visible and easy to do. I'm delighted that it is. So in terms of your role, what are your priorities for now until 2016?
Well, we've got a police and crime plan that reflects what local people want in policing, their priorities, and they cover 4 very distinct areas. So one of them is about having a focus on victims completely. So all policing is now very, very victim-centred, victim-focused. Whereas before, I think policing was more focused on the outcome. Now it's actually, what does the victim want, is usually the first question the police tend to ask. The other area is about crime and community safety, so driving down crime, keeping communities safe. And people in Sussex particularly want the police to continue focusing on antisocial behaviour, because I think that really blights communities. They want to focus on domestic abuse, so any violence against women, girls and so on. I know domestic abuse can happen to men as well, but the majority of victims tend to be female. So antisocial behaviour, domestic abuse, also hate crime is a real issue for people in Sussex, they tell me. And that's any crime against you because of your gender, your race, your religion, your disability. These are all hate crimes. And I'm delighted Sussex Police have had such a strong focus on this in the last 2 years that last year they were one of only 3 police forces in the country where the recording of hate crime in all 5 areas increased. And that says to me, if there's more crime being reported, it's not because there's more crime out there, but I know it's because people feel more confident in coming forwards. They know that if they speak to the police, they will take them seriously and they won't poo-poo the idea. So these are kind of key areas. And the other one was road safety as well. People in Sussex get very exercised about the roads. So Sussex Police has a particular focus there as well.
Yes, right. Well, as a keen cyclist and walker, I'm very pleased to hear that as well. And with a young grandchild who wants to wander everywhere, it's very important to me as well. Now, one of the things I noticed, a little bit of research, was that I think there are 41 police and crime commissioners in England and Wales, and you are one of only 5 women.
6.
Oh, is there 6
women?
Is there?
There's
6
of
including
us.
you.
Yes.
Now, do you think women, and you in particular, bring anything different to the role from a man? And I was just listening to what you were saying about domestic violence, about hate crime, and it seems to me, I wonder if a man would have that same sort of priority or not.
Well, I'd hope so. I mean, a lot of my colleagues do have domestic abuse as a priority, which I'm delighted about. But certainly the violence against women and girls and things around female genital mutilation and that, I've definitely been very vocal about here. Perhaps because being a woman you're more aware of these things, I don't know. But I'd like to think that men are too. But I probably have a different way of dealing with things. But I don't know if that's down to my gender or just my background and who I am. I have a very professional relationship with the Chief Constable and his senior team. And we have a really good working relationship, actually. It's very positive. It's intrusive, and I do hold him to account, but I challenge him. But when I scrutinise and challenge, I'm also very supportive as well. You know, I want Sussex Police to be the best police force in the country, because that reflects brilliantly on this office and brilliantly on my team that work with me. But and it's great news for everybody in Sussex as well. So it's in my interests to really make Sussex Police even more successful than they perhaps already are. So you know, that's kind of my aim with it. But I don't know if I bring anything different being a woman. Not really thought about that too much. I know people say it's great to have women in areas where others see you, in public area, because that encourages younger women coming forwards. So I do a lot of work, if I can, with younger women, mentoring, and certainly a lot of speaking and getting out to schools and encouraging young girls to get more active, particularly in the public sector, but also in politics as well, which is hugely important.
Thank you. Now, as you may or may not be aware, most of our listeners are elderly, and I'm wondering if you have anything to say about crime and the elderly in Sussex that's come to your notice?
Well, when I talk to groups that are much older, I often reflect and talk about my mother. She just turned 80 this year, and she's been a huge influence in my life as a sort of woman that sort of stood on her own 2 feet and did it her way. And she was always very encouraging to me to follow my own path. But now I've noticed, now she's got an elderly, she has changed quite a bit. She's become a lot quieter and more frail, if that's the word, more vulnerable. And she notices it herself. And whereas a woman, 30 years ago, like me, she would have made her own decisions and just gone out there and done it. She now reverts a lot to me and asks me a lot about my opinion and what she should do. And it was interesting, quite a few months ago, I set up a commission of young people, the Youth Commission in Sussex, 28 young people aged between 14 to 25. And what I wanted was their opinions on policing in the county, because policing affects them differently to how it affects older people. And it was so successful and has done some fantastic work. And my mother turned to me and she said, well, it's all right for the young. She said, but what are you doing for me? And I thought about what she said, and she was so right that last month we launched our Elders Commission. So I now have a group of people aged 60 years and young and above, and their job is to go back into their communities and have conversations with their friends and colleagues who are similar ages and ask them about particular areas of policing and how it affects them being older. And I'm really, really excited by this work because it's never been done before in this country. This is an absolute first when it comes to policing.
Right.
And the Elders Commission, my goodness me, they came to the office here a couple of weeks back, and they sat round the table and they all introduced themselves and what they've been doing in previous lives. And the amount of experience, the wealth of experience around that table was quite astounding. And I sat there in complete awe with all of them, actually, because, my goodness, there's hundreds and hundreds of years worth of experience around one table. And they are now going to take certain themes, they're going to decide what they want to talk about, and take certain themes back into their communities and their associations, their groups that they belong to. And already we've got one gent who's been in touch, and he's spoken to over 100 senior citizens already.
Wow.
And getting their views. So whereas the Youth Commission managed to have conversations with 2,000 young people across Sussex, I set the challenge for them, and they said, "Oh, we'll smash that." So I reckon they're going to have 3,000 or 4,000 conversations, which would be fantastic. And then the police are really interested because they want to understand what they need to do policing. We are an increasingly older population, and we have some parts of Sussex where I think we have more older people there than we do young. So it is really important from a policing point of view that they understand this and they adjust their policing accordingly. So I'm very excited, yes. And most importantly, my mum's happy. So you've got to keep your mum happy.
Absolutely. And has anything emerged so far? Have you been surprised at any of those of concerns for the elderly that you weren't aware of before?
Well, one of the areas I know for certain that they're going to be looking at is around the scams and frauds against the elderly. The knocking on the doors, people that come, also the phoning over the telephone lines. There's been a lot of fraud there recently, and that's a huge concern. So I await with interest, but this is going to happen over the next 9 months, and then they report back to me. They're doing an interim report in September and the final report next March. So really exciting.
Well, a huge number of aspects to your role. I was going to ask you, what's a typical work day like for you? Is there one?
Probably not, no. I mean, it is quite surreal sometimes. I think I have probably one of the most exciting and interesting jobs ever. And no 2 days are ever the same. So I can reflect back on a week where one morning I might get up and do an early morning drugs raid, like I did last week. So I was up very, very early. We did the planning session with the police, and then we went in the house and I watched as they took away people for having drugs on them and dealing and so on. And then I went on to another meeting with a residents group, talking to a group of people who are concerned about local policing and so on. And then in the afternoon went up to the Home Office, where I was in a meeting with the Home Secretary, and we were talking about domestic abuse and the police's response to it. And then on in the evening back to Sussex to another meeting with perhaps the Rotary Club or somebody like that. I mean, it just is so different. No 2 days are ever the same, but hugely privileged to be in this position, I think.
I'm sure. Is there any aspect of the job you particularly enjoy and look forward to?
Probably meeting the public, because they're very, very different. And I love Sussex because people are very vocal in Sussex. They're not frightened to tell you what they think.
No.
And they're certainly not frightened to tell you if you're doing something wrong, but just fascinating to meet different people and the lives that people lead. And I've been inside both prisons here, so Lewes Prison and Ford Prison. I've been inside more police stations, as you can imagine, than most people would in a lifetime in the last 2 years, and just the different aspects of different people's work, but meeting the police officers and staff as well. I think I came into the role, I was saying this to the Chief Constable just the other week, I came into the role with not a terribly high opinion of policing. And over the last 2.5 years, I have completely changed. I see real dedication from officers out there and police staff as well, who just go above and beyond. You know, they will stay on for 2 or 3 hours after they're supposed to go home because they want to finish the job. They will go out at weekends or when they're on their leave, on their off days, because it's important to a victim or what have you. It's just really a real vocation that people have. I'm incredibly, in awe of a lot of the work that they do.
That's interesting. I mean, my previous life was in education, and sometimes you used to get the feeling that people didn't think very highly of teachers, for example, until they actually went in to see what they did and how dedicated those people were, working well beyond the hours normal. And it may be that your early misgivings about police reflect probably some of the public's as well. And I wonder, you've, in a position where you can go in and meet and you have had your views changed. How do you change the views of the public about the dedication of the police? Because there's some pretty bad press out there, isn't there, of police?
There is bad press about the police, but I think, as you rightly said, if you meet people yourself, they will change you. And part of that is my role, is to go out to connect with the public, to speak to them about their concerns in policing, but I think also to reassure as well. And we are very, very lucky in Sussex. We do live in one of the safest counties in the country. Crime's gone down year on year, and we have a hugely dedicated police force and police staff who look after us and keep us really safe. There's a lot of policing that goes on that we never get to see, and I've learned things that sometimes I wish I hadn't learned about the world out there, but also I'm really reassured by how safe we are kept by the police. Not just your local police, but also, from a regional level, from a national level. There is a massive machine that comes into play when something happens. So I think, part of my role is to give that reassurance to the public and to be able to talk to them, which is why I like to go out with the police when I can, to see different aspects of policing, and to get a better understanding of what it is they do, so that I can speak with a little bit more authority and, resonance myself.
You strike me, interviewing you now, as a very positive and optimistic person, and it's nice to have somebody like that in that role. Mostly. Yes. Have there been any, over the, what is it now, getting on for 3 years, I suppose, you've been in the role. Yes. Have there been any disappointments for you?
I suppose I started in the role frustrated that not many people had turned out to vote. And so the first few months of this new role was all the talk was taken up about, you don't have a mandate, what a waste of time it is, and so on and so on. Whereas there was an awful lot to get done in those early days, and it was terribly negative, a lot of the press. I suppose that for me was very frustrating. But as you said, typical of my outlook in life, you roll your sleeves up, get your head down, get on and do the work, and you can hopefully turn people around, which is what I hope I'm doing with people. Just keep working hard and that. But no, the actual role itself is absolutely incredible. It's fascinating, really fascinating. And I don't just work with the police, because I get out to meet the public as well. I see both sides. A lot of victims of crime as well. And sometimes some of the perpetrators are victims themselves, which has been quite an interesting lesson for me to learn. And I suppose the really depressing point about it is the young children who are caught up in families where the same thing happens over and over again. That revolving door of crime, where there is, they copy the sins of their fathers and mothers and so on. And you just think, goodness me, if you could break that cycle when they're young, which is why it's great. I mean, the local authorities are doing some fantastic work in Sussex with certain families where they've seen that they have real complex issues, and they send key workers in to work with them. The police go in, the local authorities and so on, and they're really putting some intense work into these families, and they're starting to have real benefits. So I think, in sort of 5-10 years from now, we'll really benefit from that. If you can turn one child's life around, you can turn around their whole future, and that, you know, and all those victims potentially you can save as well along lines. So I think this is, for me, this is such an incredible role to be in, and such a short space of time to make a real difference as well.
Yes.
So you know, I have some statutory duties that I have to do, but again, one of them is around restorative justice. So this is where you bring an offender together with a victim, only if the victim wants it. It always has to be if the victim wants it. But if he or she wants to meet the perpetrator of their crime, they can. You bring them together. And it's a hugely powerful event that happens. And it can really restore the balance for the victim, gives them an opportunity to say how they feel and how that crime made them feel and so on. But also for the offender, it can completely change the way that they see the victim of their crime. We had a lady who came and gave a talk just last week, and she said how she'd been a victim of burglary, and she wanted to meet the burglar, and so she did. And he had never met any of his victims before. In fact, he'd burgled hundreds of houses and just didn't put any faces to people at all. And for him, that made it much easier. But actually having to sit down, face her, and apologise to her, he found an incredibly moving experience, and is soon to leave prison, and she's fairly confident that his life will be very different to the one that he's led for many, many years. So I have responsibilities now for that, and ensuring that that is properly rolled out consistently across Sussex.
So is that fairly new?
Fairly new. Sussex Police and various partners were doing some of this already, but it was a little bit spotty. It wasn't consistent across the county. The Ministry of Justice have given me a pot of money and said, right, go away and spend it wisely. So working from my office, I've got a manager I've appointed here, and he's formed the Sussex Restorative Justice Partnership. So a group of about 20 different agencies all come together under this banner, and they are starting to really do some interesting work across Sussex with various cases, right from very low-level cases of antisocial behaviour, right up to some quite severe cases, rape included. So I think over the next year or so we'll start to see some real differences being made there, real changes.
Very heartening to hear, thank you. And you mentioned earlier about families and young children being involved, etc. And you mentioned right at the start here of your own family. How has this role affected your family life when they knew that you were going to become this? And you've just told us how busy a life it is and how varied it is.
Well, my eldest is 27 and my baby's just turned 24.
Right.
So this was going 2.5 years ago. So I sat them both down and I said to them, right, this is what I'd like to do. And the eldest one, who's lovely, he said, oh, Mum, we'll support you, whatever you want. The younger one said to me, does this mean I can't go drinking anymore? And I said, no, it doesn't mean you can't go. It just means, you have to be really sensible, because if you do anything that's not sensible, I will personally kill you. So that was quite a funny conversation. But I think for me, the important one was my husband.
Yes.
I mean, he's been an absolute rock throughout this. And without his support, I couldn't have done it. He has an incredibly busy life as well. He travels a lot around the world. So when we do see each other, we can sometimes be a bit like ships that pass in the night. But we have an incredibly interesting conversations, that's for sure. And I couldn't do it without the support of the family. But we did have some very funny conversations in the early days. And then there was one Christmas where they came home, the boys had been to the local, and they said, this police officer followed us into the car park. And they said that for the first time in their lives, they really were worried that they'd done something to upset me and that it would ruin my career forever. But actually, the police officer wasn't interested in them. It was the car in front of them that they'd pulled in front of. So that was quite amusing. It's kept them on their toes. But now they've both moved out of the county, so they're not my responsibility anymore. Probably just as well.
Yes. Yes. Katie Bourne, Sussex Police and Crime Commissioner, thank you very much for your time and for answering all those questions.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for letting me answer them.